Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for being here. I know you're working for me, and I appreciate it. So here we go. I want to start off tonight, first of all, by telling you that we're going to be studying Proverbs. So if you don't have it open, you want to go ahead and do that. Proverbs chapters 1 and 2. We're going to try to make our way through the material there. I'll explain kind of the general flow that we're going to take with the book of Proverbs over the next tonight in 3 more classes, if the Lord wills. And it's based on how the book is actually constructed. So just so you know why and where we're going with everything. But I want to get started tonight with a discussion question, wide open. So this is your answer, not looking for the correct answer. Okay. But here's the question. What is the piece of advice that you have given most in your life? That you have given the most?
Train up your child.
Really? Okay, good. Straight out of the Proverbs. Good. Good. You've got a lot.
Oh, yeah.
I'm his son-in-law. I know. He's got a lot.
I think it's advice that my mom gave me. Be nice to everyone.
Be nice to everyone. Love it.
Or be
good.
kind.
Yeah. Good. Okay. Anybody else? What do you got, Miss Nancy? Turn the other cheek. Sermon on the Mount. I love it. Okay. Anybody else? The advice you have given the most often. Probably at work, I would guess. Or if you've got adult kids, probably as they were growing up. Amy?
Work smarter, not harder.
Work smarter, not harder. I like that one. That's great. That's super good to learn early in life. Okay.
What comes to mind for me is buy low, sell high. Buy
low and sell high. There you go. Okay.
Fake it till you make it.
Good.
That's a good problem.
Mama told me that.
Hey, sometimes you just do the right thing.
Whether you feel the right thing is a whole different story.
You just do the right thing. Oh, she's right. Okay. Mine is, if you do the little things right, then you will learn to do the big things right, which is basically a riff on Jesus saying, he who is faithful in little is also faithful in much, and he who is dishonest in little is also dishonest in much. Okay. Now, what's interesting about him is, I think everybody either has one that is yours or is becoming yours, one of your most frequent ones, or there's been somebody in your life that you heard them say a piece of advice on a very regular basis. Okay, and probably a lot of them, like buy low, sell high, work smarter, not harder, are kind of pithy, right? There's either like a little rhyme scheme, or there's a little rhythmic bounce to it, or there's a little back and forth wordplay kind of happening in that, okay? That's the kind of thing that we're into with the Proverbs. It is the Bible's own book of those pithy little helpful sayings, pieces of advice that we want to use on a frequent basis, because the wisest man ever said, this will help you in life. Okay, so that's kind of just getting our minds set for where we're going and what we're doing when we look at the Proverbs. But I want to do a lot of introduction because this is a very sophisticated book, although it is based on those extremely simple little linguistic terms. Okay, so that's what we're doing. That's a good setup for us tonight. Michael's going to lead us in a word of prayer, and then we'll get going into chapter 1 and everything else that introduces this.
Our Father in heaven, we're thankful for another midweek bringing together of our family here with you. We pray that you'll be with us and help us to focus on these things tonight, to learn more and become better Christians and stronger in our foundation. Please be with Dan and help him to remember what he studied, to be able to help us understand more of the Proverbs, and help us that we might always want to strive to be better and better every day. Please forgive us of our sins, and through Christ we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, brother. All right, so when we introduce a book of the Bible, we almost always start with basically the same information. We start with the author, the recipient, when it was written, and its purpose. So here we go. When we talk about Proverbs, who is the author? Verse 1 tells us a little bit. So who's the author? Yes, but not really, but yes. Okay, so Solomon is one of the authors. There are at least 3 authors mentioned that the different parts of the book came from, and somebody else compiled this book. Okay, this book is going to be filled with things that are either from a king or from an oracle. Okay, you think of the oracle at Delphi and the whole story of the 300 in Thermopylae and all that kind of stuff. You think of that kind of character, okay? Just somebody that is known for speaking truth and able to give good advice. We're talking about kings and oracles that are giving the advice for the common man. The difference with Proverbs, I think, from so many of the other books of the Bible is it doesn't read, and you can tell this from the clues in the book itself. It doesn't read as though somebody just sat down and poured out the entire thing all at once. Like Paul writing the letter to the Romans or the Philippians or to Timothy, or like, Luke doing his massive research project and talking to all the eyewitnesses and then sitting down with paper and writing Luke and Acts in one big storm of writing, okay? It's not that kind of thing. Proverbs is an anthology. Okay, he's pulling advice and he's pulling speeches and he's pulling essays from different sources and compiling them all together in this book. So Hezekiah is specifically mentioned as being part of the compilation team. It's Proverbs 25, verse 1. Anybody looking at it? Anybody mind just flipping over there and reading it real quick? It's just an interesting note on how the text came together. 25:1.
These are also the Proverbs of Solomon, which the men of Hezekiah, king of Judah, copied.
Okay, so anybody know how the King James Version came into being? It's the story of how the King James Version of the Bible came to be. Yes, it was. It's not a trick question. It was King James. The King of England employed an entire team of scholars and commissioned them translate the Bible into workable English, which in 1611, that was workable English. Okay, it's not anymore. But that's kind of what we're looking at starting in 25:1 is Hezekiah basically did the same thing. He employs a team of guys and he commissions them sort through the Proverbs that Solomon wrote and get us a good anthology, a good compilation of the most important, most helpful ones. Okay? So, when does that mean that this book was written? Basically, any time between Hezekiah and Malachi. Hard to say anything more specific than that. People have guessed at it, but that's what they're doing. They're making educated guesses. Sometime between Hezekiah and Malachi, that's all that we know for sure. Okay? But we do know that it's a compilation put together, and that begs the question, who is it for? Who do you think the book of Proverbs is for? It's not written to the Jews in Philippi, for example. Who's it written to? Who is it? Who'd you say? Yeah, my son. Okay, whoever that is. Basically, it's a linguistic device, leaving it wide open for anybody who will listen. Okay. Now, the specific phrase that is used is, my son, hear this or this or this or this thing. Okay. These are the things I want you to be paying attention to. And so that's who he addresses it to the most often. Over 23 times, actually, throughout the book. But it's basically just out there as a general essay, a general anthology of good advice for a good life. If you want to have a good life, learn from this book. It's out there. It's available. It's free of charge. Okay? So that's where it comes from. Now, again, what is its purpose? Its purpose is to guide daily life in lots of different circumstances. And not only that, it's not as though it just gives you a single key to each door and it says when you get to this door, use this key and unlock it and it will work perfectly. It's not like every single piece of advice for every single life or life event. Okay? But what it's doing is with all of those put together, it's teaching us how to think in a different kind of way. So it's not just that it's telling us when you meet this equation in life, here's the answer, right? It's not life algebra, right? This situation plus this situation equals this verse from Proverbs. Sometimes that works, but on the whole, you take Proverbs as a whole unit, and it's teaching us how to think so that when we encounter a situation that's not addressed in the book, we've learned how to think this way, and we'll be able to use the same tools to work through that one too. Okay? And it's in that way that Proverbs is meant to give us guidance for daily decisions that go beyond simple black and white, good and evil. Okay? Now, here in a little bit, I'm going to admit that tonight I am going to sound like I'm contradicting myself. I've figured out how to rationalize that. Isn't that what you're supposed to do? So I will explain that in a little bit, okay? Because there is some black and white in Proverbs even, right? Even though the title is Beyond Black and White, there is some of that in Proverbs. And I'll show you how I think the two fit together. But I want to just kind of register, I think Proverbs fits with this title for the wisdom literature because there are things in life where you go, well, it's not as though my two choices here are right versus wrong. My two choices here are good versus better, but I can't tell which is which all the time. Wisdom will help with that. Okay, and so that's why I say it's beyond black and white. Okay, let me give you an outline in just a second, but before I do, any thoughts, questions, or comments at this point? Pause before I move on here for just a second. No, we're good? Okay. Here's why I said a little while ago, the book is fairly sophisticated, and its design is just kind of interesting. It's a bit blocky, you know. There's kind of hard stops in this book where he does a certain thing for a certain amount of time, then he makes a hard stop and switches to a whole different kind of writing. It's not a total departure from genre, but he's just doing something in a very different way. So here's what I mean. The first section, chapters 1 through 9, we learn about the extreme value of wisdom versus folly. And these are like essays, basically. So we have 9 chapters of basically essays on good versus bad, wisdom versus foolishness. Okay? From there, we start into chapter 10, where we get the little snippets of advice. We get the one-liners all the way through from chapter 10 through about chapter 27, with a few odd ones in there in other places where it'll be paragraphs or longer poems. Okay? And that's what this section is, from 22:17 to 24:34. Don't ask me why the chapter divisions fell where they did when they were put in the 1200s, but there you go. Okay? From 22:17 to 24:34, we have Proverbs from other wise men, not Solomon. Okay? Starting in chapter 25, we go back to the Proverbs that were written by Solomon, but this is the compilation that Hezekiah did. And then in chapter 30 and chapter 31, we have 2 long-form poems that are from somebody completely different. And we don't really know who either of these people are, Agur and Lemuel. Or really, it's from Lemuel's mother. His mom had taught it to him, and somebody else knew about it and got it in writing, and it was included in the Proverbs, okay, in this grand anthology of wisdom. So it's, like I say, it's just very blocky, you know, like where you just seeing chapter 25, verse 1 is a hard stop and a hard start on a new section. And it's just kind of odd to me how he has long-form essays at the beginning, one-liners, short paragraphs, more one-liners, more long-form essays. I don't know that the structure necessarily tells us something about that. Maybe it does, and somebody smarter than me knows what that is. But I just think it's a really interesting and, again, fairly sophisticated book, because it could have just been the one-liners, but the essays at the beginning are very helpful to help for us to interpret and use those one-liners. Okay? And then you close the whole thing out with these long-form poems from Agur and Lemuel, and it's just really cool. So that is the structure of the book and how it all is laid out. Let me give you one more slide here about kind of the nature of Proverbs as things and also Proverbs as a book. And then we'll pause and we'll kind of have another chance for discussion and questions. In terms of the writing style and the genre and how it fits in the rest of the Bible, I heard this really helpful dichotomy one time from a preacher that was noticing how certain other preachers have a tendency to either preach the good news or preach from the Bible things that are good advice. Now, let me just kind of pause right there and ask this question. Which of those is the Bible way? To preach good advice for living and commands for how you're supposed to do your life, or to preach the good news and what Jesus has already done? Okay, good. Yes, I've been training you and it's working, okay? Yeah, the answer is the Bible has both, okay? And really, you could change the verb in that sentence and it just say the Bible is both, okay? It is the good news of what God has done for us, and it has been that for a long-running story. But all along the way in that story, we have the good advice on how to make the most of what he's done. So you have all this good advice about how you're supposed to live your life in reflection of His grace. Okay? Which one of those would you say Proverbs is, though, most? Yeah, it's definitely the good advice side of this. Okay. Now, along the way, there's going to be plenty of good news. So, take a look at it now. Let's go into chapter 1. Let me see. Just look at the very last verse of chapter 1. This is wisdom herself speaking in verse 33. Whoever listens to me will dwell secure and will be at ease without dread of disaster. That's good news. Right? That's God telling us that if you do things the way I'm instructing you to do them, if you follow the wisdom, I will give you these good things. That system is already in place. You just align yourself with that and it will work. The good news is already there. Go on down, look at chapter 2. Look at verse 6. For the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth come knowledge and understanding. He stores up sound wisdom for the upright. He is a shield to those who walk in integrity, guarding the paths of justice and watching over the way of his saints. Is that good advice or good news? It's good news in this case, but the next thing he's going to do is turn around and say how it becomes good advice. That if you understand this about God, it will help you to understand righteousness in your own walk. So it is doing both. However, it is way more weighted to the good advice side of things than it is to the good news descriptions of what God has done. And all of that, then, is why I've described it as guidelines for intentional living. Okay, this is a word that I know gets used a whole lot, the word intentional. Everybody talks about that. Some people make that their word for the new year or whatever. This year I'm going to be more intentional. And I get that, and I actually think it's wonderful. I just remember hitting my 20s, in my early 20s, and realizing I kind of sat back one time and just pondered all the men that I respect and I want to be like, what is it about their lives that makes me respect them so much? And it was because I saw in them that they were doing things on purpose. They were not going with the flow. They were peaceable. If that's what we mean by go with the flow, then sure, they were that. But they weren't just going with whatever life gave them. They were making choices and choosing a path and being deliberate about the way they did their lives. And that's what the word means. And that's what Proverbs will help us to do. Okay? So, and I mean Proverbs as a thing, right? As items. So when you think about them, a proverb is, and Mickey talked about this a little bit back in August, I think it was, when you preached your sermon on the prodigal. A proverb is a pithy maxim or adage. It is often metaphorical. Okay, so you'll see different references to different things like a leaky ceiling, right? A leaky roof in a house is used as a metaphor throughout Proverbs a couple of different ways. Or, certain animals are used as different metaphors for the way that people behave, ants and lions and things like that, okay? So that's the way that these tend to work. Are they, let me do it this way. The advice on the best way to read them, I don't know if this word will speak as well to everybody else as it does to me, but the advice on the best way to read them is to read them trusting your instincts. Read them instinctively. Because when you hear one of these proverbs, you know what it means. Now, you may learn over time better and better what it really means. You will learn a depth to it as you continue to hear it and ponder it and experience it. But just read it trusting your instincts, not overthinking them too much. Okay? Maybe here's a better way to say that. Are the Proverbs rules? Are they rules?
Yes. Depends on your definition of rule, because if it's something that's, you do this is going to happen, that's, to me, is a rule.
Okay. Okay. Yes.
Ashley? Maybe a lot of them are not exactly rules. I can't put my finger on it right now, but I know somewhere in here there's a couple of verses, consecutive proverbs, that seem to say the exact opposite of each other.
Yes. Yes.
So that tells me they're not rules. What's the term for that? Truism, maybe?
Yeah, okay, that's a very helpful word right there, a truism. Yeah, I like that. Okay, Josh, you weigh in on it.
Wisdom mind for me is teaching. You can have
Yeah.
a teaching that's both good news and good advice. That's also a rule and not a rule. It's also a law and not a law. And the idea is it's the application of these things to something to make it better.
Yes. Okay, I like that. That's a great way to say that. Alex, you get to be the last one.
Okay. I would just classify it as go bys.
Oh, yeah. Okay, that totally works. I like that. Another way to say it maybe is best practices. Okay? Right, this is best practice kind of advice. Okay? And that really is the way that they function a lot of the time. Are they rules? No. Are they laws? No. Are they formulas? Definitely not. Okay? Because as Gary said, some of the time there are things in there where you go, this plus this will come out this way. And in the very next verse, as Ashley said, that one of those same things plus something else will not come out the way you think it will. The formulas just don't work perfectly time after time after time. And I think we probably know why that is. Because we have another book in our Bible that tells us that formulas don't always work. Right? What book would that be? Vapor of vapors. All is vapor. Right? So here's the question then. Having said that, are they true? Oh, yes. They are true in spades, in abundance, okay? There is truth and wisdom in abundance to be found in this book. And so that's why they're helpful. I think Ashley's word, and maybe a good one to throw into the margins here, these are truisms. That's probably a really helpful word right there. If you're not familiar with it and all its nuances, go check it out in Merriam-Webster. But it's helpful. I think that works really, really well in this case. So, getting into the book, the first 2 chapters, if you didn't get a chance to read them, scan through them right now. Kind of notice where they break. There's a break from verses 1 through 6. Verse 7 is doing its own thing. Starting in chapter 1, verse 8 through 19 is a section. 20 through the end is a section. And all of chapter 2 is a section to itself. Scan through it right now. If you did read through it and you've already kind of absorbed some of this, check this thing out that I did here on the screen. Anybody seen one of these word clouds before? Okay. This looks like a jumbled mess. I'll show you how it works in just a second. But basically a word cloud, what it does is it takes a certain amount of writing, or it gets input from different people, and it makes the bigger words out of the most frequent words. Okay? It's an interesting little exercise. So whatever you see there that is printed the biggest is the most important, or are some of the most frequent words. And what I did was copy the entirety of chapters 1 and 2 into this generator and make it produce this for me. So here are the top results. Number 1, no surprise, wisdom. Yeah, that's what it's for. It's to help us to understand life, to navigate life in a better and more skillful kind of way. Number 2 is the word knowledge. You got to know some stuff in order to have some wisdom. Wisdom is more than knowledge, but you have to have knowledge to have wisdom. In order to get knowledge, you have to gain some understanding, which comes by instruction. Okay? I also think it's really interesting that the way this is described, the metaphors and the method, is through words that follow certain paths. This is an interesting little nuance to the metaphor here, okay? And then, this is really interesting to me as well. If you take in the whole of this, look right in the middle. The word will is one of the most frequent. It's actually the second most frequent, I think. It may be just slightly more than wisdom in the first 2 chapters. And this is not the kind of will that's like an active will, like this is what I want to happen or I'm choosing to happen. It's not a choice. It's a promise. It's that this will be this. If you do this, you will be blessed. If you do this, you will not be blessed. You will die. Okay? So it's just an interesting exercise to realize the language that's used there, I think, tells us a lot about how he means for this to function, what he means for us to really get out of this. There will be wisdom that is based on knowledge that will teach you correct paths, and all of this will, there's the promise, lead to something either good or bad for you. You choose. And so that's what gets us into the first couple of chapters here. which I have begun by titling it The Treasure of Wisdom. This, I think, is a fitting title for the first section. Okay, The Treasure of Wisdom. So, verse 1 of the entire thing, the Proverbs of Solomon, son of David, king of Israel. Okay, number one, he's citing his source. This is a good non-plagiarizing author. I appreciate that. I respect him for it. Okay, he's citing his source, and he is telling us one thing we've already said, that Proverbs is going to be a compilation of some of Solomon's works, of his Proverbs writing. Now, I highlighted some. I've emphasized it there on the screen because if you go back to 1 Kings and you look at chapter, 4, verse 32, Solomon wrote over 3,000 Proverbs and over 1,000 songs as well. I wish we had the complete collection. That would be very cool. However, out of that 3,000 Proverbs, the compilers have selected about 800 of Solomon's to put in here for us. And that's already too many for my brain to process. But it tells me what a brilliant man he was. It tells me what a gift he really had received from God, that so many helpful things could be said by one person. Okay, so we're going to have the other authors to be cited later, but basically this is the reason that we always attribute, or that we often attribute Proverbs to Solomon, is because he is the most prolific writer in this batch that's been compiled here. Okay, now beyond that, we get into the next section, and can I get a volunteer to read verses 2 through 6? Who wants to do it? Raise your hand and let me know. Chapter 1, verses 2 through 6. Thank you, Josh.
To know wisdom and instruction, to understand words of insight, to receive instruction in wise dealing, in righteousness, justice, and equity, to give prudence to the simple, knowledge and discretion to the youth. Let the wise hear and increase in learning, and the one who understands obtain guidance. To understand a proverb and a saying, the words of the wise and their riddles.
Okay, so this whole thing starts off, first of all, this is the purpose statement, and it starts off with a batch of near synonyms. Now, I know they're not synonyms, I know that, but they're close, and I think that's the point, is that he's kind of telling us there are different nuances to the things that you need to know and the way you need to respond to your life. And what I'm going to do through the rest of this book is try to teach you how to respect those nuances and think through them in a godly kind of way. So it's not just that he says in the opening verses, my purpose is to teach you the things you need to know. He will do that, but he says, I want to teach you how to be discretionary with the things you know. I want to teach you how to be insightful with the things that God has told you and how you can be the best version of his people. I want to teach you how to search for deeper understanding than just what is plain knowledge. So I really love this section. I love all these different words. I love the nuances of them. They come across really well in English. My understanding is they also do that in Hebrew. That's kind of the point, is that there are nuances between all these different things. I do also think it's interesting. The Hebrew language, a lot of the times, is way more economical with words than the English language. So, like, they would say something in 4 words that it would take us 15 or more a lot of the times. And the Bible translators have struggled with this for centuries, trying to figure out how do we, can we be as economical with English as they were with Hebrew? And we just can't a lot of the time. However, in an economical language like that, they have this many different words for wisdom and knowledge and the way that you should think about being the kind of person God wants you to be. What does that tell you about the importance of this subject? Right? That's that old cliche thing about how the Eskimos have 5 different words for ice, right? Because it's an important part of your world. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know any of the Inuit languages, but it's making the same kind of point, right? What does it say that they have this many different nuanced words for how to think properly and behave in the world that God made? Okay, so Proverbs' purpose is to help us increase in all of these things. We discussed this several weeks ago. This was from our very first class. We put this quote on screen, so I'm going to do it here again. Wisdom is the ability to live life skillfully. Okay? When you think of skill and somebody that has a particular skill, you can throw a monkey wrench into what they do, and they will still be pretty stinking good at it, if they're truly skilled at their craft. Like a great guitar player, if he breaks a string, you won't ever know because he'll change his scales on the fly. If he's truly skilled at his craft, you can throw a monkey wrench in it and everything will still go well. Well, what if you lived your life at that same level of mastery? That's what Proverbs is trying to help us do. So that when, not if, but when life throws us a monkey wrench, that we're not completely caught off guard and our faith in God is not completely derailed and our ability to do things God's way is not lost altogether. We can respond in a skillful kind of way because we have the wisdom that has been given to us by Him. I also gave you this quote, and I'll give you this one again because it's just so beautifully worded. The book of Proverbs opens by breaking the plain daylight of wisdom into its rainbow of constituent colors. Derek Kidner has such a way with words. If you haven't read any of his stuff, you totally should. But this is his opening, and this is his assessment of the opening, and I think he's exactly right about that. All these different words, wisdom, discretion, knowledge, insight. I've forgotten some of the others here. Righteousness, instruction, understanding, all this different stuff. So helpful. Okay, and then we get to verse 7, and I told you a minute ago, verse 7 is doing something entirely different. That's probably not the best way to say this, but it is a different thing because verse 7 is the motto for writing wisdom literature. The only one of the wisdom books that it doesn't show up in is Ecclesiastes, but it does show up in Job and in the Psalms. Okay, verse 7 says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction." It's not exactly verbatim that way in all those references, but all of them do say the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge or wisdom. So this is the motto for them. This is something that they are going off of all the way through. Again, Proverbs, the Psalms, and Job, all of them are running with this idea that if you want to really be the person you're supposed to be, if you want to think about the world in the right way, if you want to live life skillfully, start by understanding that God is the one to teach you that. Start with that. Everything else will fall into place from there. Okay? All right. Any other thoughts on the opening of chapter 1? Questions, reflections, advice, pithy proverbs that you can say here?
I see it tied to Ecclesiastes, chapter 12.
Oh,
Fear God, keep His commandments.
Mm-hmm.
If you can get that ties
yeah,
to that.
there you go. It's a loose paraphrase of the exact same idea. So there you go. It is in Ecclesiastes. Thank you very much. Okay, so there you go. Thanks, Gary. Okay, now from there, the rest of chapters 1 and 2 are going to show us only two paths. They're going to describe life and us in this constant back and forth, in this very simple dichotomy between one and the other. And it is that simple all the way through. Okay, so the contrasts are between foolishness or wisdom, paralleled all the way through with good and evil, light and dark, day and night. Those are the metaphors that are used all the way through. Those are the parallels and the contrasts that are used all the way through. And I know, as I said a little while ago, when I put it up that way, that sounds like I am perfectly contradicting the title of my own class. Because those things are all opposites. And they are as opposite as black and white. And I know that. And I know that when we say that it opens by breaking the plain daylight into its constituent colors, and it's not just simple black and white, when you get to these two chapters, it sure sounds like it is just black and white. You have one good option and one bad option. One will lead to life, the other will lead to death. So how does it fit? And I want to actually leave that open for you to answer because it does fit. I was kidding earlier about justifying myself. I really believe that it fits, okay? So you tell me how. How is it that Proverbs can be beyond black and white, but we have this incredibly simple choice between a good option and a bad option? How do they fit together?
Deeper meanings than just the surface of what you see.
Okay, some of the time that's what's going on. There's deeper meanings than just what you see on the surface, okay? Dad?
You know, we sometimes always talk about the gray area.
Okay.
So I think what I would say is that what it does and the way it fits in is that Proverbs defines gray area.
Okay. All right. It is going to give us some definition in between the black and white, for sure. Mr. Randall, what you got?
Yeah, it makes me think of how the book of Acts is set up. You got concrete at the beginning, exactly what Peter and the other apostles taught on Pentecost. And then from there it just transitions to, and they taught Christ.
Yeah.
Well, how do you interpret that? Well, the key was given at the beginning.
Oh, okay. Oh, actually, yes. I'm tracking you 100% with Acts, and I think that's a very good thought overlay to the Proverbs. I'll show you why in a second. Very good thought overlay. Okay? Others? Mr. Mickey.
Context.
Yes. Yes, exactly.
A statement might be made here that applies in this context. And as Ashley said a while ago, the very opposite stated that appears to be a contradiction when it's not. It applies to a different context.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Now, I'm going to add a set of categories here that are going to most closely align with the way Randall said it, but it's not a disagreement with the way that anybody else said it either. Okay. Here's my set of categories. The micro choices that each of us make are going to have to go beyond black and white some of the time, which is context. Life context. Okay. Should you be hard on your kids or should you be easy on your kids? Context. Okay. The answer is both. It depends on the wisdom to have to understand the context. Okay. Should you be a saver or a spender? Context. Should you invest or should you save? Context. Okay. So there's all sorts of different examples that you can use here. Should you work hard or should you relax? Context. It's so dependent on that sort of thing. So all of those, though, are choices that you make in your life. Those are in micro, the things that you're supposed to be knowing, having the wisdom to decide rightly. But in macro, what is the choice that all of us have to make? In macro, the choice is, are you going to follow God or not? It is that simple. And that's the choice that's being described in chapters 1 and 2. And the reason that works so well, and the reason that I said Randy's comment on Acts works so well, is because the book opens, number one, by telling you there's more than black and white, but if you don't have the black and white choice that you have to make made correctly, none of the rest of that rainbow of constituent colors will be helpful to you because you haven't decided to follow God. And so again, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of all wisdom. All of the colors and all of the full color spectrum of knowing God and being who we're supposed to be comes down to deciding between these two paths, because the one is a path of wickedness and foolishness. And there's a really cool outline of how this plays out. This is from Derek Kidner's commentary as well. If you look at verse 11 of chapter 1, the invitation of that particular path is, come, let us lie in wait for blood. Let us ambush the innocent without reason. That's the invitation. Scan down and look at verse 16. Their feet run to evil and they make haste to shed blood. That's the plan of what they're going to do. But then look at verse 18. These men lie in wait for their own blood. They set an ambush for their own lives. Why? Because they have chosen the wrong path. There is one simple choice. In macro, are you going to do things in a godly, righteous way or in an evil and stupid way? Well, make that choice and make it right, because that one is black and white. Now, the nuances within that, there's a little bit more to be finessed. But the choice is really that simple between a path of righteousness and wisdom and its outcome, which we read a little while ago, the last verse of chapter 1, and then all these other things that are going to happen as a result of making the wrong choice. All right, let me just keep moving so I can give you as much information to finish this out, more for you to ponder and think about and decide which of these you have chosen and make sure that you've chosen correctly. Two paths here, and these two paths throughout a lot of this section are personified as two women. So you kind of have this description, right? Starting in chapter 1, verse 20, wisdom cries aloud in the street, in the markets. She raises her voice. Okay, and then you go down to chapter 5 chapter 2. Chapter 2. And verse 16, he talks about how if you do the things that you're supposed to, you will be delivered from the forbidden woman, from the adulteress with her smooth words. So you have Lady Wisdom who is crying out and saying, let me make your life better, let me teach you, let me be there for you. And you have Lady Folly who is out there trying to entice you and destroy you, pull you away. Now there's a really fascinating thing, and I should have budgeted our time to spend more time on this, but it's a really fascinating thing that I've seen in a few commentaries that describe how these are actually also describing two different versions of Eve. They're kind of personifying Eve in a new way, which is a really cool thing to think about. Because what was it that Eve and Adam were after? Which tree? Knowledge of good and evil. Knowledge, wisdom, discretion, the ability to know good and evil. So how did she go about getting the knowledge of good and evil? How did she actually go about it?
She cheated. She got the apple.
She cheated, yes. What does the text actually say in Genesis 3? When she saw that it was good for food, that it was delight to the eyes, it was desirable to make one wise, she what? She took it. The word is took. It's not one of those words that our brains register as theologically significant, and I understand that, but it is. She took the knowledge of good and evil. Well, she could have gotten the knowledge of good and evil in a different way. How was that? What did they never do in conversation with God in regard to that tree? Ask. They never asked. So if they had asked, God is described over and over again as a father who gives gifts to his children. If they had just asked, teach us your way, give us the knowledge of good and evil the way we should have it, I believe he would have given it to them. Maybe not that fruit, but he would have given them the knowledge they needed. Instead, they figured, we've got this and we'll do it ourselves. We know what is good and evil now. We have taken this for ourselves. And so the two different versions are, Lady Folly is Eve taking the knowledge from God her own way, and Lady Wisdom is Eve receiving the knowledge from God in his way. Yes, sir?
And that reminds me of Abraham and Sarah deciding to get him a descendant their way.
Yes. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Go Cain and Abel. Cain does it his way versus Abel, who gives what God has, uses what God has given him. Look at Jacob taking from Esau. It's a theme all the way through Genesis, especially Genesis, but it has ripples all the way through to us, which is awesome. But yeah, now here's the other thing about it. The choice between the two paths. Simple choice, right? Pretty obvious choice, wouldn't you say? And yet, we are part of a species that continually, in micro and macro, chooses the wrong path. And that's what verse 26 in chapter 1 is telling us here. I just think this is fascinating. This is wisdom talking, and she says, I also will laugh at your calamity. I will mock when terror strikes you like a storm, and your calamity comes like a whirlwind when distress and anguish come upon you. Well, that's not very nice. You shouldn't laugh at people that are suffering in some sort of trouble. But this, again, is another helpful, I'm going to keep coming back to this name again and again. This is another helpful quote from Kittner. When he talks about this phrase where wisdom says, I will laugh, he says, this is not an expression of personal heartlessness, but of the absurdity of choosing folly, of the complete vindication of wisdom, and the incontestable fitness of the disaster. Basically, what it's doing is, this is wisdom in verse 26 and 27 saying, if that's what you choose, I just can't believe that's the choice you would make. And she is laughing at us for being so silly. That's just, of course that's the way that's going to pan out for you. You chose folly instead of wisdom. Right? It is laughable, not because she's heartless, but because it's so absurd that that's the choice we would make. Because wisdom leads to life, but foolishness leads to death. And that's where we have to stop for tonight. But I will talk about it a little bit more, and then we'll go into chapters 3, 4, and 5 next Wednesday night, if the Lord wills. Okay? All right. Thanks, everybody, for your good participation and your insights. Before I'm done, I want to do this differently than I normally do. I will be here next Wednesday night if the Lord wills, but the Wednesday after that I won't. And I'd love a volunteer who would be willing to step in and teach. So if any of the men want to volunteer, come and let me know about that. Normally I reach out directly, but I want to see if anybody that I haven't asked before would like to step in. So if that's you, let me know. All right, you guys can come on in. You're good, Lexi.